At midnight on the 8th of March 2014, a Boeing 777-200 Malaysian Airlines aircraft, designated flight MH370, sat on the tarmac at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia. Flight MH370 was a scheduled passenger flight to Beijing, China. At the controls of MH370 was Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, assisted by First Officer Fareeq Abdul Hamid. There were an additional 237 other people on the flight. As part of the usual pre-departure procedures, MH370 logged on to the Inmarsat satellite network via the aircraft's satellite communication system, known as the Satellite Data Unit, or SDU. MH370's SDU and the Inmarsat satellite network exchanged 17 messages during the 30 minutes prior to takeoff. At 39 minutes past midnight, 3 minutes prior to MH370 taking off, the moon set in the west. The remainder of the flight would take place over a completely dark ocean. At 42 minutes past midnight, MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, cleared by air traffic control to climb to flight level 25,000 feet. The aircraft continued on its flight path to Beijing and everything appeared normal. At 1:19 a.m, after cruising at flight level 35,000 feet for 18 minutes, the last verbal communication with MH370 was conveyed to Malaysian air traffic control as the aircraft approached Vietnamese-controlled airspace. Captain Zahari was heard to say, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Less than 2 minutes later, the aircraft disappeared from radar screens. Shortly after 1:19 a.m, an unknown individual descended into the electronics and equipment bay of MH370 through a hatch at the front of the first-class cabin and pulled 3 circuit breakers. Multiple non-critical plane parameters stopped functioning at this point, including the SDU via the left AC bus. Other equipment now offline included the in-flight entertainment system, which also comprised the satellite telephone, and the cockpit voice recorder. Also at this time, passengers utilising electronic devices for communication outside of the aircraft are, without warning, logged off their connection. Pulling of the 3 circuit breakers would ensure no possible outside communication via any device, including the satellite telephone, by anyone on board the aircraft. At the same time, an incident in the cockpit saw an unknown individual seize control of MH370 and lock themselves in the cockpit. Also at this moment, the passenger cabin was depressurized, incapacitating everyone quickly due to hypoxia. There is then no resistance from anyone in the passenger cabin to anything that is happening in the cockpit. Immediately prior to 1:21 a.m, MH370's transponder stopped functioning, ensuring this is the aircraft's last recorded secondary radar position. MH370 then deviated from its prescribed flight path, completed a U-turn, and exhibited erratic maneuvers which included dramatic changes in altitude and airspeed. After the transponder stopped emitting its signal, tracking of MH370 was possible only through military and civilian primary radar. In the space of 103 seconds, an unknown individual had hijacked MH370, ensured no outside contact was possible by the occupants of the passenger cabin, and guaranteed the aircraft was now not visible to secondary radar and would remain hidden for the remainder of its flight. MH370 then followed an unscheduled course across the Malay Peninsula towards the island of Penang. After passing south of Penang, MH370 proceeded northwestwards up the Strait of Malacca. At 2:22 a.m, MH370's last recorded position shown by primary radar indicated a ground speed of about 500 knots and an altitude of 29,500 feet. Immediately prior to 2:25 a.m, an unknown individual descended into the electronics and equipment bay and reset the 3 circuit breakers previously pulled, rebooting the left AC bus and allowing MH370's SDU to come back online after 64 minutes of loss of signal. When the SDU came back online, communication between MH370 and a ground station via the Inmarsat satellite link recommenced. As the aircraft continued south into the Indian Ocean, this communication, referred to as a handshake, generated an imaginary line referred to as an arc. At 2:25 a.m, the first handshake, initiated by MH370's SDU, was received by the ground station via the Inmarsat satellite network. Sometime after 2:35 a.m, MH370 turned south at approximate coordinate 6.9 degrees north, 94.6 degrees east, just north of the island of Sumatra, and continued on a new heading of about 188 degrees into the Indian Ocean, being sure to remain outside the range of the primary radar located at Sultan Iskandar Muda International Airport, Banda Aceh, Indonesia. At 3:41 a.m, the second handshake, initiated by MH370's SDU, was received by the ground station. Between 4:41 and 6:41 am, the third, fourth and fifth handshakes were exchanged. At 7:43 am and at 40,000 feet altitude, the sun rose on the eastern horizon. At 8:10 am, the sixth handshake, this one initiated by the ground station, was received by MH370 via the Inmarsat satellite network. At 8:19 am, the seventh handshake, initiated by MH370's SDU, was received by the ground station. This is the last known communication with MH370. This final handshake created the final arc in the sequence of arcs in the Indian Ocean known as the seventh arc. Between 8:20 and 8:21 am, MH370's fuel reserves were exhausted and a controlled glide to the surface of the ocean was commenced by an unknown individual. Between 8:38 and 8:39 am, MH370 successfully accomplished a water landing in the southern Indian Ocean. The aircraft submarined temporarily and incurred severe damage to its underside, but did not break up. It remained afloat for a short while before dropping below the waves intact. During the successful controlled water landing, some pieces of bodywork separated from the aircraft and have since washed up on coastal areas of the western Indian Ocean. The total number of confirmed debris pieces from the aircraft is about 30. On the 29th of July 2015, a complete flaperon, a flight control surface of the right wing structure of MH370, washed up on a beach of Reunion Island. This piece of debris exhibits specific damage alluding to MH370's final moments. There is very little to no collision or impact damage on the exterior surface. However, very visible is a completely absent trailing edge revealing clear tearing of the flaperon structure. The damaged trailing edge is indicative of high-speed level flight into a controlled water landing. This area of the wing was the first point of contact with the ocean surface. This suggests the plane was level, or close to it, at the time of impact. Similarities are obvious between this damage and that sustained by Flight 1549, the Hudson River water landing of the 15th of January 2009. Conclusively, this flaperon debris tells us it was involved in a high-speed, high-energy impact event. The flaperon, however, avoided destructive impact damage during the plane's final moments because the movement of the plane was in a forward direction and the flaperon was protected from the impact by the wing structure. On the 23rd of June 2016, a piece of a flap, a flight control surface of the right wing structure of MH370, washed up on a beach of Pemba Island in the western Indian Ocean. This piece of debris, the inboard section of the right outboard flap, exhibits similar characteristics to the flaperon debris which was immediately adjacent to it on the right wing. There is very little collision or impact damage on the exterior surface. However, separation damage is evident, showing it was torn from the bulk of the outboard flap structure during a high-speed, high-energy impact event. Also evident is a completely absent trailing edge. This tearing of the trailing edge is indicative of high-speed level flight ending in a controlled water landing, precisely the same event sequence that caused the flaperon's damage. The seal pan cavity damage in the flap is the most compelling of any damage on any piece of retrieved debris. This damage shows the flap was not extended, hence it was not in a landing configuration at the time of impact. Instead, it was retracted, suggesting it was configured for high altitude flight. It shows internal damage to a lower and an upper stiffener and confirms the flaps were retracted as the plane impacted the water. This is explained by the upper and lower stiffener damage, which is indicative of movement of the support track in the seal pan cavity only when the flaps are retracted. Upon contact with the water surface, the first movement of the flap is upwards, causing the support track to collide with the lower stiffener.
Lower stiffener damage.
The contact of the support track on the lower stiffener, then ricocheting and contacting the upper stiffener, indicates movement of the support track in the vertical plane, itself indicative of level flight.
Upper stiffener damage.
The highest speed MH370 experienced at the time of contact with the ocean surface, because the flaps were not set for a standard speed landing, about 200 knots or 370 km per hour, would guarantee the underside of the aircraft was damaged substantially, ensuring it would sink very quickly. On the 2nd of February 2014, Captain Zahari allegedly conducted a flight simulation on his home computer that took the plane, after departing Kuala Lumpur International Airport, into the southeastern Indian Ocean off the coast of Western Australia and on a path towards McMurdo Sound, Antarctica, ending at about 45 degrees south, 104 degrees east. This flight simulation was a deviation from the original scheduled destination of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The flight simulation relates to either flight numbers MH370 or MH368 departing Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 11:45 am and 10:30 pm respectively. The flight duration of this leg is 9 hours. If we analyse the deviation of MH350, the aircraft travels through daylight and reaches the end point in the southeastern Indian Ocean at 8:45 pm or in darkness. If we analyse the deviation of MH368, the aircraft travels through the night and reaches the end point at 7:30 am or at about sunrise. The similarity of MH368's simulated flight path and MH370's suspected flight path, both terminating just after sunrise in the southern Indian Ocean, suggests the intent of a daylight water landing. The satellite data tells us MH370 flew for a long time after contact was lost. The spacing of the 7 arcs across the Indian Ocean support MH370's likely ideal flight performance, ensuring it could travel as far as possible as economically as possible. As the cruising speed of a Boeing 777-200 is 892 km per hour or 482 knots and is the most likely speed travelled into the Indian Ocean, a speed close to this must be used for calculating distances flown for any trajectory considered. To determine the final location of MH370, we need to identify the most likely crossing point on the 7th arc, and from there we can identify the most likely endpoint of the aircraft. If we plot multiple likely coordinates as a starting point of the southern turn north of Sumatra, the trajectories that followed on a heading of about 188 degrees can be determined. The calculations resulted in a grouping of crossing points of the 7th arc, the most likely coordinate of these being 38.6 degrees south, 87.2 degrees east. After crossing the 7th arc, complete fuel exhaustion saw the Boeing 777-200 commence a controlled glide covering 17 kilometers forward for every 1,000 metre drop in altitude. As a final consideration, the altitude at the crossing point of the 7th arc would most likely have been about 40,000 feet or 12,200 metres, as this height would have given MH370 close to ideal flight performance south into the Indian Ocean, and Captain Zahari's alleged hard drive flight simulation also quoted this height. Crossing of the 7th arc as the first engine flamed out due to fuel starvation, and with only one engine operating for the next 90 to 120 seconds, shows the total distance travelled would be a maximum 30 kilometres. After complete engine flameout within those 2 minutes and at 12 kilometres altitude, the glide ratio realises a maximum gliding distance of 204 kilometres. Also, we must consider the satellite communication positioning error, as the data acquired from the exchange of signals between MH370's SDU and the ground station in the 30 minutes prior to takeoff showed an average positional error of the aircraft of 17 kilometres. Therefore, the total maximum distance attained would be 251 kilometres. MH370 travelled a maximum of 251 kilometres from the 7th arc to coordinate 40.8 degrees south, 86.8 degrees east. However, it is likely the maximum distance travelled was less, as the actual realised glide ratio would have been closer to 14 to 1. The amended calculation gives a maximum distance travelled from the 7th arc of about 215 kilometres. Hence, the most likely endpoint for MH370 is centred on coordinate 40.5 degrees south, 86.9 degrees east. It is worth noting that a massive undersea area adjacent to the 7th arc has already been searched. It is absolutely evident MH370 experienced a controlled descent to take it beyond these areas rather than an uncontrolled plummet to the ocean. The previous video is a synopsis highlighting compelling evidence as to the real scenario of MH370, and without question the remains of the aircraft are located in this area. This is where MH370 is.